The phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I knew before I even picked it up that something was wrong. A man my age learns to read the silence between moments. You develop a kind of internal radar after 63 years on this earth, and mine was screaming. I fumbled for the phone on my nightstand, knocking over the glass of water I kept there out of habit. My late wife Margaret used to tease me about that glass. "Harold," she'd say, "you've never once drunk that water in 20 years. She was right. I never did. But I kept filling it anyway. "Mr. Whitfield?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it. A tightness. "This is Catherine Boyle. I'm an attorney with Boyle and Associates in Nashville. I'm sorry to call so late. I need to speak with you about your daughter." I sat up straight. My daughter Claire was 38 years old, lived 20 minutes away from me in Brentwood, and had 2 children of her own, Sophie, who was 9, and Ben, who had just turned 7 in March. She was a high school English teacher. She graded papers at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, and drank too much coffee and laughed too easily at her own jokes. She was the best thing I had ever had a hand in making. "Is she hurt?" I asked. "She isn't hurt," Catherine said carefully. "But Mr. Whitfield, I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. There are some documents I need to show you in person. I can't discuss them over the phone." She paused. "And please don't mention this call to your son-in-law." I didn't sleep that night. I had known Derek Harmon for 6 years. He and Claire met at a mutual friend's wedding in Chattanooga, and he had charm the way certain men do, effortless, polished, the kind that makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room. He shook my hand firmly at their first dinner, asked me about my years as a civil engineer, remembered details I mentioned only once. I thought I liked him. He was a financial advisor. He wore good suits and drove a car that cost more than my first house, and he had opinions about wine that I never asked for. But Claire was happy. She was genuinely, visibly happy in those early years, and I told myself that mattered more than anything else. The doubts had come slowly, the way water erodes stone. Claire stopped calling as often. She missed my birthday dinner, 2 years running with excuses that felt rehearsed. When I did see her, she seemed smaller, somehow quieter, measuring her words before she spoke them, glancing at Derek before answering even simple questions. I told myself it was the stress of 2 kids and a full-time teaching job. I told myself a lot of things. There had been one afternoon, about 1.5 years earlier, when Sophie called me from the school bathroom. She was 8 years old and whispering, and she said, "Grandpa," Mommy cried for a really long time last night, and Daddy told her she was being stupid. I held the phone and felt something cold move through my chest. I asked Sophie if her mother was okay, and Sophie said she seemed okay now. I mentioned it to Claire the next time I saw her. She waved it off so smoothly, so quickly, that I almost believed her. "Derek and I were just having a rough week," she said. Sophie misunderstood, and because I wanted to believe it, because I didn't want to be the difficult father-in-law who caused problems, I let it go. I have thought about that moment every single day since. Catherine Boyle's office was on the 4th floor of a building just off Charlotte Avenue. She was a small woman in her 50s, with silver-framed glasses and the kind of steady, unhurried manner that made you trust her immediately. She shook my hand and closed the door and asked me if I wanted coffee. I said no. I needed to hear what she had to say. She slid a manila folder across the desk. "Mr. Whitfield, your son-in-law contacted our firm 8 months ago. He said he needed assistance with estate planning, updating beneficiary designations, reviewing insurance policies, that kind of thing. Routine work." She folded her hands on the desk. "Last week, when I was finalizing some documents he'd asked us to prepare, I noticed something. I need to show you." The first page was a life insurance policy. $2 million. The insured, Claire Ann Whitfield Harmon. The beneficiary, Derek James Harmon. The policy had been taken out 14 months ago. I looked up at Catherine. "That alone isn't unusual," she said. "Spouses take out policies on each other all the time." But look at the next page. The next page was a second policy. Another company. 1.3 million. Same insured, same beneficiary. Taken out 7 months ago. 2 months after Derek had first contacted Catherine's firm. And the next one, she said quietly, $800,000. A third company, dated 4 months ago. I set the papers down. My hands were not entirely steady. He took out $4.1 million in life insurance on my daughter, I said. In 14 months, Catherine confirmed. I want to be careful here, Mr. Whitfield. Purchasing life insurance is not illegal, but when I saw the pattern, multiple policies from different companies in rapid succession, all naming the same beneficiary, I felt I had an obligation. I have a daughter of my own. She took off her glasses and set them on the desk. There's more. She showed me the investment account documents next. Claire had a retirement account from her years of teaching, not enormous, but built carefully over 15 years. Derek had been listed as co-manager on the account for 3 years. In the past 18 months, the account had been drawn down by just over $60,000 through a series of small transfers to a brokerage account registered in Derek's name alone. The transfers were structured to stay below the amounts that trigger automatic bank alerts. Does my daughter know about any of this? I asked. I can't say for certain, Catherine said. But the signatures on the transfer authorizations, I showed them to a colleague who has done document work for fraud cases. She believes at least 2 of them are inconsistent with your daughter's other signatures on file. I sat in that chair for a long moment and looked out the window at the Nashville skyline and thought about my daughter at the age of 7, sitting on my shoulders at the 4th of July parade, shrieking with delight at the fireworks. I thought about the way she'd called me from college the night before her first big exam, panicking, and how I'd stayed on the phone with her until 2 in the morning just talking about nothing until she calmed down. I thought about how she had looked on her wedding day, so certain, so luminous, and how I had shaken Derek's hand at the reception and welcomed him into our family. What do I do? I asked Catherine. I've already been in contact with a detective I trust at Metro Nashville Police, she said. He's reviewed what I've shown you. He wants to move carefully if Derek is alerted too soon. Assets disappear and cases fall apart. They need a little more time to build something solid. She leaned forward. In the meantime, I need you to act completely normally around your son-in-law. Can you do that? I thought about it. I was a retired engineer. I had spent 35 years solving problems that required patience, precision, and the ability to hold a great many things in your head without letting any of them show on your face. Yes, I said. I can do that. The hardest part was seeing Claire that Saturday. She had called me earlier in the week to invite me to Ben's soccer game, and I had said yes before Catherine's call. So I had no reason to cancel without raising questions. I drove to the field in Brentwood and sat in my camp chair on the sideline and watched my grandson run himself breathless in the September sunshine, and I smiled and cheered and tried to behave like a man who did not know what I knew. Derek was there, of course. He stood with his arms crossed, wearing a polo shirt and sunglasses, occasionally glancing up from his phone to watch the game. He nodded at me when I arrived. I nodded back. Claire sat beside me for a while. She looked tired in a way that had become familiar to me over the past couple of years. A deep tiredness, the kind that sleep doesn't touch. There were shadows under her eyes she'd covered with makeup. When Ben scored a goal and she jumped up cheering, I saw a flash of the Claire I remembered, bright and unguarded, and it lasted about 4 seconds before she sat back down and her face settled into something careful again. You okay, sweetheart? I asked. Of course, she said. She smiled. Just tired. End of the grading period. I watched Derek on the other side of her. He was on his phone again. He hadn't looked up when Ben scored. You know you can always call me, I said. I kept my voice easy, casual, anytime, about anything. She looked at me for a moment, and something moved across her face that I couldn't quite name, something between gratitude and fear, and then it was gone. I know, Dad, she said. Thanks. I drove home and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. The detective's name was Raymond Garrett. He called me on a Wednesday evening, 2.5 weeks after my meeting with Catherine. He asked me to come in the next day. Detective Garrett was a big man, unhurried, with the manner of someone who had sat across from a great many people in difficult circumstances and had learned exactly how to hold that space without filling it unnecessarily. He walked me through what his unit had found. The transfers from Claire's retirement account were confirmed forgeries. 3 out of the 5 signatures were not hers. They had identified the brokerage account the money had been moved to, and they had traced a pattern of activity consistent with what Garrett carefully called financial abuse within a domestic partnership. They had also pulled Derek's background more thoroughly than any routine check would have and found something that Catherine had not known. Derek had been married once before, to a woman named Sandra Harmon, née Kowalski, in Columbus, Ohio. Sandra had died in a car accident 6 years ago. There had been a life insurance payout of $1.8 million. The Columbus accident had been ruled accidental at the time. Garrett's counterpart in Ohio had reopened the inquiry 2 weeks ago. I sat very still. "Is my daughter in physical danger?" I asked. Garrett was quiet for just a moment. "We don't have evidence of intent to cause physical harm at this time," he said. "But I want to be honest with you, Mr. Whitfield. The pattern of behavior we're looking at, financial isolation, escalating insurance coverage, history with a previous spouse, these are factors we take seriously. We're moving as fast as we responsibly can." He looked at me steadily. "Is there any way you could have your grandchildren spend some time at your home in the next week or two, without it seeming unusual?" I thought about it. Sophie and Ben stayed with me sometimes on weekends when Claire and Derek had plans. It would not be strange. "Yes," I said. "I can manage that." "Good," he said. "We'll need about 10 days. I called Claire that evening and told her I'd been feeling a little down since the anniversary of her mother's passing, which was true. It had been 14 years and it never entirely stopped hurting, and asked if she might let me have the kids for a long weekend coming up. She said of course, immediately, with a warmth in her voice that nearly undid me. "They'll love it, Dad. Sophie's been asking about you." The weekend came, and I picked them up on a Friday afternoon. Derek was not home. He was at a client dinner, Claire said. I loaded their backpacks into the car, and Sophie immediately began telling me about a book she was reading. And Ben asked if I still had the old checkers set, and for a little while I simply drove and listened to them and was grateful. That night, after they were asleep, I sat on my back porch in the dark and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was carrying. Anger is not something I have ever been comfortable with. My father was a quiet man from eastern Tennessee who believed that men who shouted had already lost the argument. I had tried to live that way, but sitting on that porch, I felt an anger so steady and so deep that it had no edges I could find. This man had come into my family. He had sat at my Thanksgiving table. He had shaken my hand. And while he was doing all of those things, he had been slowly, methodically, taking apart everything my daughter had built and engineering her into a position from which she could not easily escape. I thought about Sandra Kowalski from Columbus, Ohio. I thought about her family, whatever family she had, and whether anyone had sat in the dark for her the way I was sitting now. 10 days later, on a Thursday morning, Detective Garrett called me. "Mr. Whitfield, I need you to keep the children with you today. Don't bring them to the Harmon residence. We're executing a search warrant this morning." "What about Claire?" I asked immediately. "We have a victim advocate meeting with her at the same time as the search. She won't be alone." I hung up and went and made breakfast for Sophie and Ben. Scrambled eggs and toast. I put on the morning news with the sound low and sat at the table with them and poured the orange juice and listened to Ben explain the rules of a video game I did not understand, and I did not look at my phone once. Claire called me at 10:14 the morning. I picked up on the first ring. She was crying, but it was a particular kind of crying, not the helpless kind, but the kind that comes when something you had been half knowing for a very long time is finally named out loud and you realize that your own instincts had been trying to protect you all along. She said she was at the police station. She said there was a woman named Karen with her who was being very kind. She said she didn't understand all of it yet. "I know," I said. "That's okay. I'm coming. The kids, Sophie and Ben, are fine. They're with me. They're fine." A sound came through the phone that I don't have a word for. Relief and grief at the same time. "Dad," she said. How long have you known?" "A few weeks," I said. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. They needed me not to." She was quiet. "I keep thinking about things," she said slowly. "Things I noticed and told myself meant nothing. I know, I said again. We'll talk about all of it, just not today. Okay, she said. Okay. I was not there for Derek's arrest. I was in the parking lot of the police station, walking Ben in circles to burn off his energy and answering Sophie's careful, intelligent questions, as honestly as I could, without telling her more than a 9-year-old needed to know. Derek's car was impounded that morning. His client accounts were frozen by early afternoon, pending a fraud investigation that, Garrett told me later, turned out to be considerably larger than the initial case against him. There were other victims, other accounts, a pattern going back nearly a decade. The Ohio investigation into Sandra's accident was formally reopened and assigned to a dedicated unit. I do not know how that ends. I may never know. But I know it is happening, and that feels like something. The hardest month was the one after. Claire went through stages that I recognized from grief, because in some ways it was a grief, the death of a version of her life she had believed in, a version of a man she had loved. There were days she was angry, days she was numb, days she called me at strange hours just to talk about nothing the way she used to do in college. I answered every time. There were also things she had to reckon with that were harder. The forged signatures on her retirement account meant she had to face, with the help of an attorney, the full picture of what had been taken from her and how it had been done without her noticing. That was its own kind of wound, not just being robbed, but being made to feel foolish for having trusted. I told her, more than once, that there was nothing foolish about trusting the person you had married, that manipulative people do not announce what they are, that the man who studies how to deceive you will always have an advantage over you in the moment of deception, because you are not thinking about deception at all. You are just living your life. She heard me. It took time for her to believe me, but she heard me. The divorce was finalized 7 months after the arrest. By then, the fraud investigation had expanded significantly, and Derek's legal situation was substantial enough that his attorney advised him not to contest anything. Claire got the house, full custody of Sophie and Ben, and the recovery process for her retirement account was ongoing through the court. She didn't get everything back. She probably wouldn't, but she got enough to start over, and starting over was what she was doing. Sophie asked me once, about 4 months after everything had happened, whether I was angry at her father. We were sitting at my kitchen table after school, and she was doing her homework, and she asked it the way kids sometimes ask the hardest questions. Quietly, sideways, not quite looking at you. I thought about the answer for a moment. I'm angry at the things he did, I said. But I try not to spend too much time being angry in general. It's a lot of energy. I looked at her. Are you? She chewed on her pencil. Sometimes, she said. Mostly I just feel weird. That's a very reasonable way to feel, I said. She nodded and went back to her homework, and I went back to making dinner, and we sat together in the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday evening in November. And it seemed to me that this small, unremarkable, peaceful moment was exactly what I had been protecting. Thanksgiving came. Claire drove over with the kids, and I had been cooking since early morning, the way my wife used to do, following recipes I had spent the past 14 years slowly learning because someone had to. Sophie helped me with the rolls. Ben set the table with the concentrated seriousness of someone performing a very important mission. Claire opened a bottle of wine and sat on the kitchen counter the way she used to as a teenager and watched me work. And we talked about her students, a new curriculum she was developing, a funny thing Ben had said at breakfast. We did not talk about Derek. We were not ready for that yet, and possibly we never would be, at least not at Thanksgiving, and that was fine. When we sat down to eat, I looked around the table at my daughter and my grandchildren, the steam rising from the dishes, the late afternoon light coming through the window and falling across the tablecloth. Sophie was explaining something to Ben with great authority. Claire was laughing. Ben was refusing to eat his green beans with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who has made a principled decision. I thought about what Catherine Boyle had said when I'd called to thank her, a week after the arrest. She'd been quiet for a moment, and then she'd said, "Mr. Whitfield, I want you to know, you weren't the only one who didn't see it right away. These men are very good at what they do. The thing that matters is that someone did see it. And that someone acted. I had not thought of myself as someone who acted. I thought of myself as a retired engineer from Tennessee who knocked over the same glass of water every night and grilled too much food on weekends and missed his wife in the small recurring ways that become part of the texture of your wad. Days. But I had answered the phone. I had sat across from a detective and held what I knew without letting it show. I had kept my grandchildren safe while the rest of it unfolded. I had answered every phone call in the weeks after. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what acting looked like from the inside, not dramatic, not certain, just answering the phone and showing up and trusting that the next right thing would become clear when the moment came. I picked up my fork. "All right," I said. "Let's give thanks." And we did.